It's like, oh, another LS swap, another LS swap. Now you're starting to see memes where it's like, when you find out it costs more than just the $450 for the motor.
Yeah. It's not near as simple and straightforward as it is just to pluck a junkyard LS and just toss it in the hole.
No.
Like, there's so much more involved in it, and you're discovering that along the way on your journey, right? I mean, it's...
Oh, yeah.
How much of a headache was it for you just to find exhaust manifolds that would work in your situation?
Don't even get me started.
Right? I mean, how many versions did you have to go through?
Literally, yeah. Welcome back to another episode on Modify with TrickFactory Customs. Welcome to a brand new year. This is the first podcast we're doing in 2024. Yes. We've done over 60 episodes so far.
Oh, that's cool.
And we were gone for a little while, but we're back. We are back, and we are going to be talking about, as usual, modified cars, because that's what we talk about on this podcast. If it's your first time watching or listening, we're a custom shop based here in British Columbia, Canada, and we just love talking about cars.
You'll notice we're in a new podcast space.
Temporary podcast space.
Elvis hates it.
Elvis hates
So
it.
what we need is your feedback. Do we create a dedicated podcast space, or what do you want to do? Keep it dynamic and float around the shop?
Dynamic.
And use the shop as the backdrop
Exactly.
for our podcast.
Yes. So in essence, the thought right now is to use kind of like this space
Because we have it.
Because we have it. It was a space not being used. And so there's a garage here. I think Tim initially, or he wants to put like a massive backdrop or something.
Yeah, we'll do some
of a
branding
car or branding or something.
Sort of consolidate some of our cool things into this one space.
Or do you prefer we do it in the shop with the cars beside us? And if you don't know what we're talking about, we're literally, you can check out our YouTube channel, Modify with TrickFactory Customs, if you're listening to this on any of the podcast platforms, so you can see what we're talking about. But we used to use a place inside the shop, but it was just static. We never moved it until the cars kind of they were there for a long time behind us.
Because those are our cars.
Yeah.
And so we could potentially do this in the working shop where, the environment's always changing, but...
Or do it even closer to the cars, like right next to the cars, and switch out the cars each week so you can kind of see, I don't know,
Why don't we do
the different
it from
cars.
inside the cars?
Inside the car. That's going to be kind of hard for lighting reasons and a bunch of other things. Also, I just noticed the acoustics here are way more echoey. It's kind of more echoey. I'm like hearing it through my headset. But so let us know what you think. And on this episode, we are going to be discussing LS swaps. We've talked about LS swaps a lot in the past. Not a lot. Maybe we made like an episode
coming
on it.
into the new year.
Yes.
We were given a breakdown of our most popular episode of 2023.
Yes.
So that's why we're going into this one talking about LSs, because LS swaps was our most listened to podcast of 2023.
And as we know, LS swaps are very easy. Or
Super
are
easy.
they?
They're super easily dismissed because people are like, oh, just another LS swap. So I think what we're going to talk about, and you are going to be our victim today.
Oh, gosh.
Because you're guilty of this too. LS swaps are easy, man. It's like a cop-out. Just throw
so
LS
easy.
in it.
Just throw it, and that's pretty much it.
So
You
tell us how
move on by
easy it is,
Monday.
Elvis.
Exactly.
So that's what we're going to dig into today.
Yes, so we're going to be talking about that today. Before we dive into the topic, as usual, what's been happening? How was the holiday break? What's going on?
Well, as being an owner of a custom shop, I didn't have a holiday break.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was here every single day except for Christmas.
Christmas Day.
There wasn't a lot of work done. We were just here.
Yeah.
Just here and kind of like, just kicking around the shop a little bit, doing little things.
Reflecting on the last year.
And here where we live, we didn't even get snow,
I know,
which was
freaking sad.
really, really strange.
I didn't have any problem with it because last year I popped in on
Christmas Eve last
Christmas
year,
Eve.
you and I came in.
and the shop was flooded.
Yeah, it was a heavy rain day after like a week of heavy snow dump, and our building, the roof was protesting heavily. We had like 6 major leaks in our shop, and sadly, and fortunately we came in because one of them was leaking directly into an open window of one of our customers' cars. How was your Christmas break?
It was glorious.
It was glorious.
Got to smoke some turkey. It was
I
mind
thought you were
blowing.
going somewhere else with that.
Just kidding. That's a different podcast.
That's a different podcast. Yeah.
But no, it was good. Got to work on my Jag, my LS swapped Jag.
I witnessed it.
Yeah, I saw it too.
Yeah, managed to get far. Not far. Yeah, I feel like I got
you
far-ish.
made some steps.
Yes, I finished my fuel system.
Oh, you finished it.
Yes, it is. In theory, it's finished. I haven't checked for any leaks or anything. So, yeah, and I also realized I made a mistake. When I was making the AN lines, I forgot to blow air out of one of them. So I was like, shoot, I need to take it apart and redo it again. But for the most part, the fuel system is all plumbed. And in theory, you could flow fuel to it.
So what you should do before you forget is take a piece of masking tape or something and a Sharpie and write on it.
Yeah.
Disassemble fuel line and blow it out and put that right on the windshield of your vehicle so you can't even start it without seeing it.
Smart. So I don't forget.
Because it's probably going to be, what, at least 7 or 8 months before you start your car?
No, man.
Yeah. So you're probably going to forget.
No. And if you do not know, Tim and I made a bet, actually, that if I get my car running before Steve. So Steve is another guy that works with us, and
he's also doing an LS swap.
Yes, he's doing a twin turbo LS swap to a truck of his.
Yeah.
But I feel like he has a while to go on that, but it's easy because his truck. No, it's easy, but his truck comes with all the. You can buy everything for an LS swap, like the mounts, all of that for his truck. And so with me, I have to modify. I feel
pretty
like
sure
more
they
than
did the
he
same
does.
for your car, didn't they?
Yeah, they do make a kit for your car.
No, but it's 350 stuff. I had to make we have to modify it to fit the LS. And there's still a bunch of things that we need to do.
A whole laundry list of excuses.
Oh my God.
I think this goes in the column as to why it's not easy.
Yeah. It's not done yet, but I know I could get that thing running next week if I want to.
I've heard that like 9 weekends in a row.
So yes, we do have it, and it has to be according to initially it was just if it runs.
No.
That's when
runs
the bet holds
means
up.
drives. It has to drive.
Nah, this is different.
Man, you can't use your Jaguar as an engine stand. That is not how it works. It has to move under its own power.
Now that you mention it, sure. After we had already decided.
Hey,
on
the rule still
rules
applies
of
to me
engagement.
too. I will make sure Steve's truck runs and drives.
Sweet. Okay. Oh, I just got my wiring harness. It just arrived, I think, yesterday. So I will be plugging it in probably sometime next week, hopefully.
That's cool, man.
We'll see what happens.
I'm pumped for you, man. Like I desperately want to see that Jaguar of yours do a fucking smoky burnout.
Yes.
I think probably in another, I don't know, month we'll get started on Steve's.
Well, okay.
It's kind of like bracket racing. It's like Elvis started back here like.
That's an interesting analogy.
And once he gets around here, we're like.
Wow, so you're giving me a heads up before.
Yeah, it's heads up.
Heads up racing. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. But I think it's going to be done at some point, or I'm going to hopefully test fire it at some point this month, next month. I don't know. We'll see what happens. There's still a bunch. I just wrote out a whole list of things that I have to do, and I'm like, oh, that's a lot of stuff that you have to do. Even after you get the engine and transmission mounted, there's a whole laundry list of stuff.
Yeah, right. I mean, and it just kind of goes into it. Like, is it easy? Is it easy, or is it?
It's funny
Kinda the
because
opposite
like
of that.
last year, every LS swap was dismissed. It's like, oh, another LS swap, another LS swap. Now you're starting to see memes where it's like some goofy face. It's like when you find out it costs more than just the $450 for the motor.
Yeah. It's not near as simple and straightforward as it is just to pluck a junkyard LS and just toss it in the hole.
No.
Like, there's so much more involved in it, and you're discovering that along the way on your journey, right? I mean, it's how much of a headache was it for you just to find exhaust manifolds that would work in your situation?
Don't even get me started,
right? I mean, how many versions did you have to go through?
Literally, yeah. I bought the wrong, because initially we were like, okay, the small. If you do not know, they made LSs in many years, many configurations. They put it in everything: cars, trucks, vans, motorhome. Did they put in motorhomes?
I don't know.
It
Probably.
would have been about those.
Literally everything. Some people say some of those that are not LSs that came in the cars are not LSs. They're LM7s, but there's a whole.
Wow.
It's a whole thing, and it can get very confusing. But for the most part, I got my manifold. First of all, just finding the manifolds that worked was a disaster. I got the stock ones that came off the truck, which I pulled my LS out of. Didn't work. It wasn't even like the space clearance between the engine and the the walls of the engine bay. Disaster. Got rid of those, and then I got the ones that you told me to get. The ones from like the Performance World.
Yeah, they're like
Heads.
a hooker, hooker cast manifold, or
and they're slimmer.
know,
They're
something like
slimmer.
that.
They're supposed to fit better, but still no space in the room of the Jag. Which you would think the Jag has a lot of space because it had a V12 in it.
it most definitely looked like it was going to be relatively simple. But when you start actually putting the pieces in the hole,
Yep.
you know, the
V12
story
is
changes
very
quite a bit,
top-heavy.
right? And that's
Yeah.
pretty sort of like, that's part of the whole thing. And that's where like most people like struggle with that part, and that they just get lost. And then the project is just up for sale.
Yeah.
Because you just can't get beyond that. Like your situation still with your exhaust manifold on the driver's side where the steering side is, like it's not a direct bolt-in kind of affair.
So I ended up going with C5 Corvette headers, but specifically from 1997 to 1999.
Yeah, right. And so even that manifold from that very specific Corvette application still needs to be modified
Yes.
to work in your application.
I had to do a lot of clearancing, hitting the heads or the headers to make sure like it kind of fit. But even at that, now the header dumps, it's a center dump, and so it dumps right on the steering column.
What kind of clearancing did you have to do? What would we refer to that as?
Persuasion?
I feel like there should be a
That's one
term.
way of calling it.
I don't know, because I initially
Impact?
Yes, I
Impact
used
clearancing?
hammers to persuade the metal to bend it to my wishes, as
Yeah.
Rob would say.
Yes.
For a whole day.
Yes.
We heard you in the parking lot
Hammering and
hammering. I'm like, what
Oh
in the
my God.
hell is this guy doing?
Yes. So that was not fun. And I did not know that this is the thing about also learning about cars. I did not know that you're supposed to, if you're hitting those headers, you're supposed to heat them up first before hammering so they don't crack, which Tim and Rob told me after I had done all the
After an
hammering.
hour of, what the hell is that noise?
What is
And then
that
it's like
sound?
Elvis is clearancing his headers. I'm like, oh my, then you came in. I can't believe you didn't break them.
I know. Thank God. Jesus is on my side.
Yeah, you must have done something right, man. Just
Pretty
keep
sure
paying
that's
your
what I
dues,
said.
bro.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, like it is just it's just the up and down. Like there's just momentum. You're like, oh, this is gonna work, and then you just get hit with.
How long did it take
no.
you to get the headers?
Like to fit?
No, to get them.
Oh, I forgot about that too. I had to wait for a while for them to arrive because I couldn't find them almost anywhere online. So that took a while. So it just from you can get an LS swap done pretty easy, but then it spirals down a hole of just time waiting, custom hammering things.
Well, I don't think it's fair to call an LS swap easy by in any way at all. You'd have to be like extremely proficient, at mechanics and parts chasing and customizing to be able to say, oh, it's easy, just it's no big deal.
I think it's easy in certain platforms.
There's a bunch of hurdles that fucking get tossed in front of you while you're on your little journey there that you have to overcome, and like finding the right manifold for your application, that was a hurdle in itself. And then you had to wait however long it took for them to get there, and then you still have to modify them. That's just one little example of the journey of the LS swap, right?
Yeah.
And like it's not the same for every single swap that there is. Like when we do the swap into Steve's 67 C10, we're not going to have the same problem as that.
No.
Because it's a wide
that'll
open.
probably be the easiest
For real, and
swap.
that's why we're not that worried about it at all. But like your Jaguar is an entirely different thing. Like it's different, and every car is going to be different, and it's going to provide you with different challenges. You know, maybe you're lucky enough that every swap piece that you need is existing.
But that's only fairly recent.
Yeah, we're lucky.
Like the
we're
swap
really
thing has
lucky.
always been like chasing parts. It's like before now, like it's only been like a few years really that you could get swap stuff.
Yeah.
Like before it was like, oh, you got to buy the motor, then you got to get an F-body oil pan, and you got to get this particular Camaro's water pump and all this type of stuff to do it, which is like delay. And then if you got to buy that stuff new, it's crazy expensive. You can get it cheap, but you start to buy some of this stuff new and it's expensive because these aren't parts that people are buying. Like how often do you replace your oil pan? So when you're buying it from GM, it's like $500.
OEM cost,
OEM cost, but now you can get like a Holley swap pan, and if you're swapping it into like muscle cars, it's pretty easy. It is easy, but you start getting into stuff like yours, it's not easy.
Yes, like that's a good point you mentioned. So it is less difficult or less challenging if you go for LS swap with a platform that
Came with a V8.
Not just came with a V8, but that is loved by enthusiasts that like to mess with their cars, because chances are you have a part that they already sell off the shelf. Like if you're doing a BMW E90 LS swap or a BMW E30 LS swap, chances are if I Google it, it probably already comes up because there's so many enthusiasts that are into those cars. So it's not going to be as difficult.
But even still, it's expensive.
It is. It is expensive.
So it's like the challenges come when you're trying to not do it expensively. So like even the E36 is like, then you start buying headers that are $1,200 and adapter plates that are this much money, but you can do it cheap like what you did, but then it's time. It's like this thing's going to take 6 months to do because everything's 2 weeks. We know how it is, and then it's frustrating. There's lots of half-finished LS projects for sale.
Very true. And with the LS swaps, there's so many ways or routes that you can go with it too. We talked about in the previous episode, which we got some good feedback from, but we talked about the whenever, for example, if you're turning in your car to a custom shop and they tell you what $4,000 for an LS swap, this is just an estimate, or just versus like another shop that tells you it's going to be like 15 grand, and you go with that $4,000 shop, you get a $4,000 LS swap at the end of the day, if you even get your car back. But that's going to be what it is. Like it's a $4,000 LS swap, and so they're not going to use the best materials. They're probably going to half-ass a bunch of things and just make stuff work. So
you can hack an LS into anything pretty cheap. If you want to use the stock ECU and all that kind of stuff, you can do it inexpensively, but it's not going to be nice. So
well, that's a big part of it, right? The packaging, the repackaging of all the components. If you do decide to use the stock ECU, there's nothing wrong with that. Go ahead. If you're not asking more out of it than what that thing can provide, and you can even flash it. But like the wiring harness and everything that usually comes with that parts truck motor and all that. I mean, it's not aesthetically pleasing. No. Who wants that? Like, yes, of course you can use it. You can do it relatively cheap, but nobody really wants to do that. So the snowball grows. Like you decide you want to do this, and then it just gets more and more and more expensive because you put something new next to something that's old or something that was intended for something else in there. And you're like, this looks like crap.
Work.
I don't want this. And it's going to be another however much.
That's a good,
and then the time spent too.
That's also a good point you mentioned, because I did that exact same thing, because this is technically my second LS swap. The first one was never done, was never completed, and I was trying to make it as cheap as possible. And so I watched all the videos. I was like, I could do this. Freaking $1,200. I got the engine for $600. Trans for $600. Wanted to do it. It came with a wiring harness. I was like, sick. I don't even need to buy a Holley. I could do this on my own. And so I cut the whole harness apart. Took the ones out I didn't need. I repinned the whole harness, and it still didn't. I used, which is also my fault. Now that I'm thinking, I first of all didn't know the best way to do things at the time, and so I reused even all the plastic what did they call them? What did they call them?
Like the sleeving?
The
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I
For the wiring?
used all of that from the truck, and it came terrible already. So I tried to clean it up, but it still looks like a 20-year-old part from a truck. And so I ended up, even for this swap that I'm doing, so I ended up taking the engine and trans out of that old Jag and cleaning it up and making it look nice, putting it in this new Jag. And even though, yes, I did test the harness and it started up first try.
I saw the video to prove that.
It was pretty sick. Like had a fire extinguisher just in case, and I started up. I had to reprogram the ECU, delete the vehicle anti-theft system, VATS, and a bunch of other things, and it worked first try. But I still had that thing of like, I don't know if I trust myself to put this in a car that I'm going to be daily driving forever. Like, and it didn't look nice when compared to the engine that I've already just refinished. So I refinished the whole engine, and it looks nice. And the wiring harness just looks not nice. And so I ended up going still the sort of cheap route-ish, but I ended up still spending like $200 and something buying an eBay harness. So yeah, even at that, I'm still spending money. And so it just it never stops. It never ends. And so, yeah.
It's all the little stuff that, like, trying to adapt to your fuel system, tying into the wiring harness. And then now what are you working on? All your coolant lines.
Yep.
These are different sizes, trying to repurpose your Jaguar radiator and all this type of stuff. That's, like, if I was to give any kind of advice, is I would buy as much swap stuff as you can afford.
Yeah.
So, like, we did the 67 Chevelle, and even it was somewhat of a challenge because we're adapting a Tremec transmission that was on a big block ZZ502 to the back of an LS. So there's a bunch of adaptation things there. But we were able to buy the motor mounts, which made it super easy to place the motor. We were able to buy the in-tank fuel pump that made the fuel system super easy.
Nice.
And it was cake.
Yeah.
Like, literally, you could do it in 2 days.
Wow.
Like, the biggest challenge was adapting the exhaust, because we had to change, because I had a full stainless 3-inch exhaust, a little bit of work there, and then adapting the transmission. So it was pretty easy, but the way, when you're trying to retain and reuse all these things, it's like your Jaguar's standard or Imperial, all your LS parts are metric. So you're trying to go from metric to standard, and there's always all these little roadblocks, and you're going from ORB to AN to this, and it's like, that stuff is frustrating. It's super frustrating.
So annoying.
Because it's always like a fitting. Oh, we're ready to fire. Oh no, we forgot this fitting. And then you're trying to take your aftermarket gauges and all those.
Oh gosh, I haven't even thought about that yet.
Sensors and adapt them all to an LS, because most of that stuff doesn't come. It's all meant for, like, small block Chevys in that format, and then it's all adapted to metric. So half the time your adapters have to cost what the gauge cost you. So it's like, that stuff is just annoying. But if you can do a bunch of them, it gets easy because you know what to watch for. But yeah, it's crazy. Like, what you're trying to do is probably one of the worst ones.
And it's funny because you would think I would learn from the first time I did this, because I did it with the other Jag that I had, the black 1972 XJ. Now I'm doing it with the white 1976 XJ. So pretty much it's almost the same on the interior. Everything is, and that in itself was a disaster. And even I feel like I'm learning just from the advice of you guys of, it's like, for example, I think I've talked about this maybe in a previous podcast, but the fuel system, for example, like we're talking about adapting fuel system old to new. It had a surge tank in it from the factory. I was like, yo, this is sick. But adapting all of that to the LS stuff, oh my gosh. It was just going to be, it was doable. And I started it, and Tim told me, but I was like, I'll adapt it, it'll be fine. But after I looked at it for a while, I'm like, yeah, it's not worth it. It's not worth the hassle of trying to adapt all of that stuff and hoping that it all works together in a way that not only looks good, but I mean, it performs fine without any issues, no leaks, all of that. It was just too much of a hassle. And so I decided to get rid of that. Another part that I just was looking at yesterday, I was like, I'm probably going to get rid of this. You also told me to get rid of it before, but I was like, I'm going to keep it. I literally just decided I'm going to get rid of it today. Well, yesterday was the, I think it was like an overflow tank. So the coolant overflow tank / it's connected in a way that it routes to the heater hose and then routes to the coolant overflow tank. Like they connected the whole system in a very interesting way.
You're talking Jaguar, yeah?
Yeah. So I'm like, it's so complicated. I'm like, why didn't they just make it simple and just run straight hoses from the heater hose to the car's heater system? And it was way more complicated than it needed to be. So yesterday I was like, I'm just going to eliminate this and just save myself all of the burden of adapting all of this stuff. And so those are just some of the challenges that it just takes time. Especially if you're trying to adapt stuff. And so as much as people think it's easy, yes, it is. But on an obscure platform like a Jag, it is not easy.
No, and there's still a lot of fabrication and little knick-knacky things that you got to do that aren't easy. Like it's tedious.
How many things you brought to my fab table where I'm just like zip, little cut, little weld, and here you go, Elvis. This will save your day. And like you can't buy stuff like that.
No.
Like you have to have it.
So it's easy if you have a shop and if you have ability and if you have tools. It's nothing that you can't overcome, but it's not easy. You're not doing it in a weekend.
No.
Like, I mean, we probably could do it in a weekend, but it's not going to be easy. We have all the stuff. If you don't have all the stuff, it's not a weekend. Because you're going to be chasing stuff, and there's so many things to consider. Like, even if you're doing it super cheap and you got a truck intake, now you can't close your hood. So now you got to get a slower profile intake. You got to do all these things.
Just cut a hole.
Just cut a hole. If you're those guys, if you're that internet kid, 100%. Just
leave the hood off.
Hole, man. Just leave the hood off.
Yeah, leave the hood off.
Weight savings, save money.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I think one of the hardest things about doing the LS swap is sort of committing to the path that you decide to go on. Like, if you just decide to do like as the example, if you decide to use the truck intake because this thing flows really good, it makes great power. It kind of doesn't look the best, but it exists, and you have to cut a hole in your hood. Like, do you want to commit to doing that?
Yeah, that's full send, man. That's full commitment.
That's only one hurdle, though.
Yeah, that's just one little thing. So I think commitment to the course of action, I think, is one of the hardest things to do in any kind of project. And an LS swap is no different. It's very, very difficult. Like you said, fuel system surge tanks and radiator hose, overflow, and all of these things. Like, of course you can adapt all these things. It's not that difficult to do. You're waiting for parts. You're having to source all that out. But dude, just commit at the very beginning to just doing it all at once. That's a hard thing to swallow.
It is.
Because now you're thinking, okay, now my LS swap just went from being this low number budget build to something that's double the price.
Yep.
And you're like, oh shit, man. Like, that's a hard one.
I would say the only thing that it's cheap to put an LS into is another GM product.
Yes. Yeah.
That you can bolt an LS to a turbo 350 or turbo 400, any of those little 5-speeds. That's the only thing that's cheap to put it in. Because you put it in anything else, like a 350Z or a 240SX, and it's like, now you're breaking transitions and half shafts, and we're only talking engine stuff. There's all these other things that go down the line that are going to become problems because of your LS. Cooling system, all kinds of stuff. Like, everything has to change. So it's not an easy thing. It's a huge commitment. Like, if you're putting it in an OBS, no problem. You put that thing in an afternoon. Like, pull that old Vortec out, LS straight in. Then it's easy. That's the only thing it's easy. The rest of it is not easy.
Yeah, and speaking about commitment too, and how it not being easy, but we have a few LS swaps or LSs at the shop. One of them is the infamous Skylark that Rob has been working on for a while, and that is an LS swap. The whole engine came complete. Like, it came complete. It's a Wagner supercharged 1100 and something horsepower on pump gas, 1400 on race gas, but it's going to be a pump gas car. But even that car, you've had to modify so much just to make that work.
There's nothing you could reuse to put that motor in. Nothing.
Yeah, no, that's...
Like, you need 5/8 fuel line. You need a crazy fuel system to feed that. That's one aspect. You need standalone ECU. There's another one. The cooling, we discussed
Yeah.
this morning. You need a crazy radiator because you're making a ton of heat. We need another heat exchanger for the air to water under the supercharger. So that's another layer. And then we got to put the AC condenser in there. We got to put an oil cooler in there, giant drive shaft, giant diff. And if we want to make the full horsepower, we need 2-inch primary header tubers,
2-inch primary headers,
minimum 3-inch exhaust. If we want to get all the power out that we paid for, so that's brand new everything.
Yeah.
Brand new everything.
It's probably about the hardest that you could possibly go.
Yeah, because you're pretty much building a car from scratch at that point. Because everything for that car, because the owner wanted it to be as powerful as possible. So you have to build everything to tailor to that LS.
Yeah, so you're not breaking it immediately. So you could take that Wagner 100% and put it in whatever you got that's existing. I don't know, pick something. Put it in a Corvette. And you start jamming 1,132 horsepower through everything else that's not built for it, you're going to be broken the same day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have to build in a margin of safety. So like our trans is built. Drive shaft we built. I think our rear diff's built for 2,000 horsepower. And then you got 13.5-inch wide wheels because there's no traction control. So you got to try to get this thing to hook up and be somewhat safe. But yeah, it just snowballs. It's crazy. Because, there's limitations. Like we've talked about in our little horsepower podcast is like as soon as you want to go over a certain limit, everything doubles or even triples in cost.
Yeah, law of diminishing returns.
Yeah, so 500 horsepower, stay right there.
Yeah.
If you want 750, it's going to cost you double. You want anything over 750, it's going to cost you 4 times as much.
Wow. So in working on that car, did you expect half of the work that you were going to do?
Well, you can. We've kind of been doing this long enough now that I can kind of anticipate that there's going to be things that need to be addressed more so than like Tim was just describing. Like it's not just a standard LS3 anymore, so it's not that simple. Like every single component needed to be considered. Okay, this is a really, really serious powertrain, and everything else needs to be done. So it's required, all of us to kind of sort of learn, okay, well, for an example, like, okay, well, we can't just use a normal drive shaft that you'd have in a standard muscle car because that's not going to be good enough. It's just fucking explode. So we've had to learn like, okay, now we need a special drive shaft that can handle said amounts of power. The diff, every single aspect of it is something that we've had to learn. And yeah, I mean,
even even the exhaust headers that you were struggling with, we're at the absolute opposite end of the spectrum because we have to have 2-inch primaries. Nobody makes it for it. We have a roadster shop chassis. We've channeled the body over the frame, so that changes the dimensions. So a lot of these store-bought ones that you can buy
are tailored
to a stock sort of chassis in a stock setup, stock engine placement, and then because we channeled the body over the frame to try to, tuck that frame in there and get rid of it. And then most of the stuff that's 2-inch primary is generally catering to drag racing. It's all long tube stuff.
So would you say
we don't want long tube because we need ground clearance. So now we're building custom stainless 2-inch headers, which is immensely expensive and time consuming. We had to have it 3D scanned so that we could get equal length because we want to get all the power we paid for. So it's created a completely different, a much more expensive version of what you had going on, but it's still the same problem. Is like we got to get all of this out of there. So now we have to build custom headers, which are a pain in the ass.
Yeah, that's crazy though, that you would think, knowing what that car is, that a system already exists with 2-inch primaries and all of that.
Well, they're long tube though, and then you're dragging them on everything, and we don't want those problems.
There's only like 3 different
manufacturers
essentially. There might be more, but like, you found like 3 different sort of sets of 2-inch primary headers that will work, that will flow, but they're all long tube. They require a lot of space, and because of all the issues that we're building to, like the body drop, the everything that we're doing, we don't have room for those. There's not even an option.
And again, same situation as you have, but opposite end. You can't get them. They're built to order because not a lot of people need them.
Oh, okay.
So they're immensely expensive. Like, I think the cheapest set I came across was probably $4,000 US, and then 6 to 8 week delivery time.
Oh gosh.
So then now it's just makes more sense for us to make
Make
our
it
own
yourself, yeah.
because there's no advantage to ordering them because there's a loss of time and the expense is almost relative to what it would cost for us to make them from scratch.
Yeah, and we would just have to modify the shit out of them anyway. So
Right. They don't suit our needs. So that's one of those things. It's like time over money and like money over time. So it's, but you got to determine it. So you get all this in there and then that's when that starts to happen. And then if it's 6 or 8 weeks, that's fine for you. If you're a home builder, you're like, oh, whatever, man, I've been working on this 3 years. But if you're a customer,
Yeah.
and it's like, hey, it's going to be 2 months to get your headers before we can carry on and make your exhaust. It's like, that's,
extra time again. And so
But if you stay in the middle, you're good. You get those
Yeah.
Corvette manifolds, be sensible, done. We could have had it done in 2 days.
yeah. Now I'm also thinking about the LS swap that you guys did in the Chevelle,
Chevelle, yeah.
yeah.
because you had to take that motor out and you had it in like a few hours.
That motor was completely set up in AN, and we have an overhead gantry crane, and I have experience. So I read that motor because of that pinched O-ring on the pickup tube in 5 hours, 4.5 hours.
Yeah.
That's not normal, though.
No, okay.
Because if you're doing hose clamps and all that kind of stuff, it's not as fast and it's not as easy. That motor was set up nice.
Yeah.
Well, it's just part of like the commitment to the path that you're traveling. Like, if and like us, we're a functioning business, and we know at some point in time there's very likely going to be servicing required. So you build that in. Like, our experience tells us, make it so that it's not going to be an issue if this ever needs to come out. And we don't just do it just for ourselves. We do
say it
so
to you
that,
all the time.
so that our customer can go to any shop
Yeah.
and have it done. Like, we're not just trying to be married to these people forever. They can take these vehicles anywhere they want. We can be proud of the work that we've done, and anyone's going to be able to jump in there, do the job required, put it back in, and it's going to function the way that it's supposed to.
Because that's the single biggest thing that we fight all the time when working on a lot of stuff is the complete lack of consideration for the next guy.
Yeah.
Even yourself, because a lot of the
Yourself.
time
That's so
you're the next guy. So like if I'm doing something, it's like, and if we've done a good job, it's coming back at some point. Like even that one, it came back because of literally a $3 part that I had to pull the engine out for.
That's so
Change the
annoying.
O-ring, put it back in. Then it was perfect because he wasn't getting the oil pressure he was looking for. But if I had just slapped it in there and not worried about, having to ever have to service this thing, it could have been a nightmare. But because we put the forethought into it, did everything right, and we tell you like, okay, well, how are you going to fix that? Like, how are you going to put that in once the motor's in?
Yeah.
And then you just can't. And a lot of stuff's built that way, and it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
And it's
And
bit us in the
that's-
ass, and that's why we stopped doing it. Like, we used to build these crazy paneled up show bikes and cars and this and that, and it's like literally every single time, I swear to God, it was never anything big. It was like a $5 air valve, and it's like I gotta take half the bike apart for $5. So we just stopped doing it. Now we build stuff that's smarter because the mechanicalness is part of the aesthetic as well, and we build it in every time.
Yeah.
So you see us cutting and welding fittings and changing angles and like just so you can get tools in and do what you need to do, and it's a lot of time, but it pays off in the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've done that on like even the previous engine swap or whatever that I've done. I don't think, or I guess I don't put the thought in of like, oh, maybe I'm gonna need to service this at some point, and I end up locking myself into a corner, and where, like you said, you have to take off half of what you've done in order to get to this part that you need to and it's a little thing that you need to change or modify.
Yeah, and that's just it. It's like when you get into this swap and you get into the project, like, yes, it is easier if you just do it in a way where, like say you're running wires or hoses or something from point A to B in the straightest possible shot that you can do it. What's going to happen down the line is you're going to, like you just said, you're going to back yourself into a corner where like now, oh, what if I need to take that piece off? But you have things kind of interacting in it and kind of locking it in place. And you're like, oh shit, now you got to take apart everything, or you got to cut apart things that you already did. And that's when things start getting hard, is like forethinking a little bit deeper down the road is where a lot of time gets spent.
even when I was working on wiring too, for the jack, I was like, oh, the first time around, I just put things everywhere. Like if it's a wire that needs to run from point A to point B, I take the shortest way possible and send it through anything that I'm passing.
I call that one-waying.
Yeah, that's a good way of calling it.
Like, because I just dealt with this from a previous person that we had working here that no longer does. Is like, the first time you do it, you put all your best effort in, but then when you're having to go back and do little things or additions, and it's like you get lazy and you just go from point A to point B. And then I had to go in and try to do something else, and it's like, I got all these wires.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Like, and I'm like, I can't even see what I'm trying to look at. So it's like we have all this beautifully loomed, perfect stuff, and then there's just these like a spider web of one ways.
Yes.
And it's just like, oh, and then you go to reach in there and you're unplugging something or tugging a wire out, and it's just, don't do it.
Yeah.
So I get it all out of the way.
And it was a disaster.
And the worst is when people don't put plugs in.
Plugs? What kind of plugs?
Yeah, like hard wiring stuff in.
Oh.
So then you go to service it, and we got to take a fender off because it got damaged. And then
you have to cut it off.
You have to cut the wiring to take the fender off. And you're like, you could have just put a plug,
disconnect there.
A disconnect. So this could be easy, which we ultimately ended up doing. In this particular project, we did a lot of that so that it's serviceable, because the car does come back. And these come back for upgrades. And then there was never a problem with the actual wiring. It's just that it's hardwired and it's not serviceable. So it's like, hey, I want an oil cooler in my car. You're like, okay, cool. You go, oh my God. Cut the wires, and then now you got to put weather packs on it, and it adds to a whole thing, but it should have been done the first time.
Yes. And so that's exactly what I did when I was trying to take off this engine or remove some stuff from the old stuff to put into this new Jag. I literally had to, after I had rewired everything, I had to cut so much that I did off. Like almost everything. Like I just had to whip and just, I was like, why didn't I just make this easy? Even like connectors, for example, even like headlight stuff, or like putting things between the firewall and the inside of the car, like the headlights, because I had to do a whole like headlight rewire, everything. But I just ran it straight from.
And then it's a nightmare.
Yeah, because like making it easy is oftentimes very hard.
Yes.
Yeah.
So an LS swap can be easy.
It can be.
But
if it's well thought out, use as much stuff that's somebody's already well thought out. Do your research. Buy those swap parts, because most of them, like, you're trying to save money, I understand, but it's not saving you any money.
Nope.
Trying to make that stuff yourself, you're going to get so heavily invested in hours, and you're just going to fight it.
Yep.
So you get that stuff that's made for your car that positions this thing properly, then you know that that's your jumping off point, because you can get the motor in no problem. Like, you just drop it in there, put it on its mount, and then start solving each progressive problem. And then you could make that decision with, you want to wait 2 weeks to get parts off eBay, or if you want to buy those $600 swap headers, because it just makes more sense. But if you're not in a hurry, save money.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that's it. Anything else?
Don't cut corners.
Yes.
Don't cut corners, because
Do it right the first time.
Do it right the first time.
Put plugs in so you don't have to cut your wires.
Yes, and we will see you guys next week. So thank you so much for watching this, and